Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this live stream during the first week of the 2024 Washington legislative session. I'm Washington State government reporter Shauna Sowresby, and I will be your host today. I'm joined today by Democratic Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig from Spokane and Republican Senate Minority Leader John Braun from Centralia. Thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us, and I appreciate you. And thanks to those of you who are tuned in right now. Our time is a little bit limited today, thanks to the limitations of a short 60-day session. So in lieu of asking a majority of my questions, I will defer mostly to reader questions for our panelists. We do have some questions that were submitted prior to today's event, and I will also be taking questions from comments as time permits. Before we get to the readers' questions, though, for viewers who haven't heard yet, I wanted to start with each of you. Senator Billig, you can go ahead and go first and talk about some of your caucus's priorities for this upcoming session.
Thank you so much, Shauna, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in to view. I'm Andy Billig, as you said, State Senator from Spokane. And, our priorities are really the priorities that we're hearing from our constituents every day. Housing, behavioral health, K-12 education, and childcare. And, these are the things that we've made huge progress on over the last few years. And but we need to do more, and so I think those are the areas where you'll see the most focus. Although I could probably give you about 30 other areas that we'll be working on as well. Look forward to the questions and getting more into detail on those policies and priorities.
I guess I'm up. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. John Braun, State Senator for the 20th Legislative District. Pleased to be here. A lot of similarities between what Senator Billig said and what we hear, and again, they come from me listening around my district, but all my colleagues listening to folks around their district. So really across the state, the things we hear are top of people's minds, the things they really want help with to make the lives of their families and their communities better. Is public safety is a top issue. We have made some progress. I don't know that we've made nearly enough, and we continue to set records in the wrong direction, both with violent and nonviolent crime here in our state. We need to do more, both to give law enforcement more tools to enforce rules across our state, but also rebuild our law enforcement community around the state. Lots of work to do there. And some of it's local level stuff, but many of the things can be helped from the state. The next issue on people's minds is affordability, whether it's food or gas or housing, childcare, healthcare. Much of this has become unaffordable for working class Washingtonians. We need to do more to make these things affordable for everyone. Of course, top of people's minds in that area right now are gas prices, and having to do with the significant increase in gas and fuel from the Climate Commitment Act. A lot of folks are focused on that and how it's affecting their lives and the lives of their families. And then lastly, Senator Billig mentioned K-12, and we're certainly focused on that, particularly on learning loss. We suffered during the pandemic. Some children have started to recover, but the ones that have struggled the most are the ones that are having the most trouble. The ones that were having academic or economic or social emotional challenges. Children of color, children living in poverty are having the most difficult time recovering. We need to do more to help them, to put them in a position for a great future. But it goes beyond that for children. It's not just K-12, it's higher ed, but also, child care. I think that's another crossover between what we're focused on and what Senator Billig mentioned. But also other things like the juvenile justice system is really broken and not giving youth who are in that system a real chance to get back on a better track and lead productive lives. Child Protective Services is struggling. Foster care is struggling. So we need to focus on a better future for all of our children. Lots of work to do there. Thank you for having me on.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and go into some questions from readers. Some school districts, such as North Thurston, are reporting an increase in chronically absent students, with those numbers up considerably since before the pandemic. Senator Braun, you've introduced Senate Bill 5850. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that does?
Sure, that's like makes a nice setup question. That's a bill I introduced. I introduced it based on a pilot that was conducted at ESD 112 down in Southwest Washington that focused on this issue. And this is a really important issue. It's been an issue in our state for a while. We focused on it some clear back during the McCleary years where we were trying to properly fund public education. We didn't get everything done, but really the pandemic has made it much worse. So we see Washington leading the country in chronic absenteeism. What that means is kids missing more than 10% of the school days during the school year. And as you can imagine, I mentioned earlier the focus on learning loss. If you want to focus on learning loss, one of the very first things you have to do is make sure kids are in the classroom. And it's not just kids not going to school, it's also kids going to school and not going to class. My wife and our kids are out of school, out of the K-12 system at least now. So we're not as in touch with as we used to. But as I investigated this problem, I was surprised to see there's a whole thing now. It's called hall rovers. They go to school, they don't go to class. We need to work on this. And this bill is simple. It focuses on collecting the data, making sure which kids are not attending class, and then start to engage with them in positive ways and with their families. Civic community organizations engaging with their families, helping break down whatever barriers are preventing them from attending class. We want to remove those barriers so they show up in class and they have a chance to learn and be successful long term. So simple bill, non-controversial. I think it's bipartisan sponsorship, but getting after a very basic problem as we try to address the larger problem of learning loss in our state.
Great. And I wanted to go to you, Senator Billig. Will your caucus, is this something that you've discussed? Would your caucus be in support of this measure? Or does the Democratic caucus have any other alternatives for how it plans to deal with chronically absent students?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a priority and a concern. I mean, it was a concern before the pandemic, and then now even more of a concern coming out of the pandemic. And I have not, my apologies, Senator Braun, I've not read the bill yet, but it certainly sounds like something, at least generally, that an issue where there's a lot of room to work together. I don't think these are partisan issues. I think one of the things that this really goes to is about, and it's one of the things we've really worked on as a legislature, is thinking about the whole child and knowing that, school is not just about what you learn once you sit down in a classroom. It's really about everything else and helping the whole child, because if we're going to have children be successful in school, they have to be there. They also have to be healthy. They have to be fed. And there's so many things that we can do as a state and a community to focus on. And that's why we focus so much on school meals, why we focus on school-based health clinics, to make sure that we're addressing the whole child. And just one other thing on learning loss, the biggest instance of learning loss, forever has been in the summer. And summer learning loss was first documented over 100 years ago in a study. And it's only getting worse. We have this big break in the summer. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's just so well documented that kids, especially kids who aren't getting summer enrichment, and so it's usually middle and lower income kids, are falling behind in the summer. And that falling behind compounds summer after summer after summer. And so an adjustment in the school calendar and an adjustment in the number of days of school is something that would really help with summer learning loss.
Great, thanks. We had a lot of questions about the initiatives, so I wanted to kind of broadly go into that if we could. How will the initiatives be considered, or will they be considered this session?
Well, I'm glad to start on that. So the initiatives, that have been brought forward, the 6 of them, largely are trying to roll back the progress that we've made as a state. So we've made progress in terms of childcare, K-12 education, climate action, and these initiatives are trying to roll back that process. So it's concerning because we want to move forward, not move backward. But I think it's also an opportunity to go out and talk to the voters, for voters to get educated about these issues in depth. And I have a lot of faith in the voters. So I think that in the end, they will do the right thing and uphold these. But in terms of what might happen during session, so the initiatives and any alternatives to the initiatives are exempt from the cutoffs, which are sort of these deadlines that we have throughout the session, where bills typically are dead if they haven't passed to the next level by that cutoff deadline. These are all exempt. So I think we have a little more time, and it's what the legislative process is for, is to be able to sort through bills and, in these cases, initiatives and alternatives. So we're just beginning that process on the third day of session here. The initiatives haven't even officially been referred yet to the legislature, but that will be a big topic of conversation going forward.
Yeah, so unlike the last topic where I think we agree almost entirely, and I certainly agree with Senator Billig's comments on summer learning loss and the need for a revised school calendar, and I look forward to working on that. The initiatives, we probably don't agree. Now, I want to be clear, they aren't certified yet. We know that a large number of signatures were presented to the Secretary of State. I know the Secretary of State, we heard from him yesterday in Ways and Means. He's working diligently on this and is committed to having them to us right away. So I do think we'll be able to consider them in earnest once they're certified by the Secretary of State, but we can't quite do that yet. I will point out that the Constitution is very clear. It tells us that our priorities are the appropriations bill, meaning the operating budget primarily, but also the other budgets, and then any initiatives submitted to the legislature from the people of the state of Washington. So this, once they are certified, should be our second most important priority constitutionally. That is very clear, and which should mean they get hearings, and ideally they come up for a vote. And I of course, I support all six once they're before us. But ultimately, it's going to depend on the majority to decide, if they come for a vote, as I believe they should, and whether they pass is going to depend on individual legislator votes. So we'll see. I do disagree with, or take a different perspective, at least, than Senator Billig. He says that these will roll back progress. I would submit that, progress from a far left partisan perspective, perhaps, but not from the average citizen. If you go look at the folks who signed these initiatives and recognize them, it's 400 to 450,000 signatures per initiatives. It's a real mix. Obviously some Republicans, but also a lot of Democrats, a lot of independents. These are initiatives that are broadly popular with the people of the state of Washington because they don't feel like it was done. These statutes were put in place in a way that took into account the effect on their lives. And the one I mentioned earlier that's top of people's minds is the Climate Commitment Act. This is an act that the way it's constructed, it is essentially a very fancy gas tax on the people of the state of Washington. And they're noticing not everybody can afford to purchase an electric vehicle. They just can't. So they're filling up, and particularly folks who are living in poverty, maybe living further from work because that's where they can afford to live, are being particularly hard hit by this. It is a regressive system. We know it's a regressive system. We even had some Democrats who voted against it with Republicans because they're concerns about the regressive nature of the program. So while I certainly support working on climate change, working on carbon, I think this is the wrong way to do it. We can do a better job of getting after this problem without placing it on the backs of working Washingtonians, and we should.
All right, thank you. It's actually a great segue into the next question. What are your specific priorities for climate and energy related legislation this session?
I'll defer to Senator Braun.
All right, well, thank you. I guess I'll go first. So there's there's an entire program put together by Senator King last session that we continue to advocate, but most of them are consumer driven. Meaning that we use consumer decisions and consumer and market forces to get after carbon. And we know this is successful because we've seen it in our state long before the Climate Commitment Act went into effect. We were still doing better than our neighbors who have, in California and British Columbia, who have either a carbon tax or cap and trade system in reducing carbon in our state. And you have to understand, we're reducing it from one of the best positions in the whole world. We have, fewer carbon emissions because of our advantage of hydroelectric reliance on hydroelectric for much of our power over most folks in the world. And yet we are still beating our neighbors who have these systems. And we are doing that because the 8 million people in the state of Washington were making good decisions about how they live their lives. We have non-GMO food and organic food in the grocery stores, not because we have a statute that says they have to be there. Those things are there because people want them. When people are motivated to make good decisions about their lives, and I believe the people of the state of Washington are motivated to do things that are good for the environment, good for our long-term climate health, you'll have better impact. So things like incentives to make investments, whether it's in electric vehicles or in solar, those are things that can work. A good example of what we can do is one that was bipartisan just this last year. In fact, I don't want to steal his thunder, but this was sponsored by Senator Billig, is the sustainable aviation work that we did last year. That's a great way to do this without placing the burden on the backs of working Washingtonians. In that system, we go out and capture carbon, we turn it into hydrocarbons, we build jet fuel, we fly the planes, we emit carbon, and we capture more carbon. So long term, it's carbon neutral, and at scale, it is competitive price-wise with the current system. So we can do all this. We can reduce carbon without placing an additional burden on the backs of Washingtonians. That's the type of thing we should be doing. That's the thing that will make us successful long-term, that people will buy into and support long-term.
Well, first I'll just say, we're on some topics where we disagree, but I think it's important to remind people that one of the secrets of Olympia is that we actually agree on most things. I mean, most of what we do here is bipartisan, and Senator Braun and I work very closely together. Even on things where we disagree, sometimes we can make things go a little smoother or a little better. There's nobody's got the market cornered on good ideas. And so working together is really important. But on this issue, and some of these issues with the initiatives and CCA, Climate Commitment Act, we definitely have disagreements. First, let me just say, I'll get to the Climate Commitment Act, but in the answer about the initiative saying that these are opposition, as sort of far left opposition, and I just completely disagree with that. When you look at something like the capital gains tax, which is an initiative, that's a tax paid on when you have a windfall profit of over $250,000, not including real estate. Only like 7,000 people in our state pay it, and those proceeds go to pay for K-12 education and childcare. That's not far left. That's something that the vast majority of people in Washingtonians are going to support. And then to CCA, which was specific to this question, or what are the priorities for energy? It's actually a lot of the same priorities that Senator Braun just pointed out, and so many of those things, including the Sustainable Aviation Fuels bill. And thank you for mentioning that, Senator Braun. That's all paid for by the funds from the Climate Commitment Act. So we're going to do all of the things that Senator Braun mentioned and more, and we're paying for it by the Climate Commitment Act. So, if you're doing high carbon emissions and you're going to pay extra for that, and then you're going to come back and we're going to invest that money in so many of the things that he mentioned and more that help to reduce carbon emissions and to mitigate the effects of climate change. And I'll just say, what are the priorities for us? The priorities is not to go backwards, because we're leaders in the country, in the world, in fighting climate change, in getting our air cleaner, our water cleaner. And we're going to keep that up and hopefully not take a step back with that initiative.
All right, we're going to jump around here a little bit. Another question that I saw several times has to do with rent stabilization. So in light of the recent passage of Tacoma Initiative Number 1 and emergence this past year of the explosion in home rental sales as a statewide hot button issue, what are the prospects for passage of Senate Bill 5961 or House Bill 2114? Both are companion bills for rent stabilization.
Can I just say this is fun? We don't get to debate very often, so it's kind of fun to be able to go back. We work together a lot, and I consider Senator Braun a friend, but we don't get to go back and forth like this very often. So I appreciate the format. This one, I'll start off on this one. It just, look, there's a lot of people struggling out there. And it's in our best interest to keep people in their homes, whether they're renters or they're homeowners. We're better off if people can stay where they are, if it's a safe and wholesome place for them to live. Now, there's debate about what's the best way to do that. I think there are some parts of these proposals which make a lot of sense. I think, though, we also have to balance any restrictions that we do with making sure that it doesn't curtail the supply on the supply side, because we need a lot more housing. We need housing at every level, from affordable housing, middle housing, workforce housing, and market rate housing. And so we need to make sure that we're helping people now with making ends meet and staying in their homes, and then balancing that with the long-term supply issues. And so that'll be what we do this session, is to work through these bills and figure out how to get that balance just right.
Yeah, I'll second what Senator Billig said. We work together pretty well, even when we disagree. We're able to do so productively and hopefully for the best purposes for our state. And I think we'll continue to do that. This is an area where we likely disagree. I think that we're on the wrong track with rent stabilization. And it's not that I don't recognize people are struggling. They absolutely are. And we agree that we want to keep people in their homes. That should be the goal. The issue, though, is we fundamentally need hundreds of thousands of additional dwellings, whether they're single residence or multifamily or any number of things in between. And it's going to take much more than the state can do. A lot of people talk about the investment in affordable housing from the state. This last year, we had a great year, and it was a bipartisan support. And folks add that up differently, but it's somewhere between $1 billion and $600 million, depending on which pots you count, that went into affordable housing. But that is not nearly enough to address our problems. If we need 300,000 homes, we're behind 300,000 homes right now. We need 1 million homes before, I think they say 2040. This is a tremendous number of homes. $1 billion, even if you could take every penny of that and turn it into a house at roughly $400,000 a piece, that's 25,000 homes. That's less than 10% of the problem. So we are not going to get there with the state investment in affordable housing. It's an important part, don't get me wrong, but we have to encourage market rate build out at large scale in our state. And the simple facts are, if you put in place a rent control or rent stabilization, as they want to now name it, system, you are going to run folks off from investing in Washington State. They're going to go invest somewhere else in our country and our world. That's a simple fact, is they are mobile. They can go invest where they see the best regulatory environment. This will be a problem. So if we want any chance of making it a future where everybody can afford at a reasonable price, a nice home, a nice dwelling, then this is the wrong answer. We're going down the wrong path. And there's tons of examples from around the country of why this is the wrong path. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing good in the bill, and that doesn't mean that we're not very, very sensitive to the program. This is, if not the top issue, one of the top issues. We talked about affordability earlier. Housing is a top issue. That's how you obviously house people, first of all. That's also how you build long-term, generational wealth within families. We want to make this possible for every Washingtonian. You don't do that by making a regulatory environment where folks will not invest.
All right, great. Thank you. I am going to hop over real quick to a live question that we just got. Can you speak to the funding for preservation and maintenance of our transportation system? OFM's transportation budget doesn't identify this as a need. Currently, all the funding for P&M has been pulled from projects for the summer season. Whoever wants to go ahead and tackle that question is welcome to.
I'm happy to jump in. We're going back and forth. Transportation is a big challenge for our state. This is a very hard problem to solve. And it goes back, for 30 years, we relied on gas taxes, some of the highest in the country, and bonding to run our transportation system. And that path has just run out. We are over bonded. We know our gas tax is going to go down in the future. And frankly, with the cap and trade system, an additional, between 45 and 60 cents on top of the highest, I think third highest in the nation gas taxes. There's no space there for more room from gas taxes. So we're without a good funding source. Folks talk about mileage driven tax. That's unpopular. That's a bipartisan unpopular. It's unpopular sometimes for different reasons, but on both sides of the aisle. So I don't think that's realistic. And we have an enormous maintenance backlog, enormous. And if you don't believe me, just drive down I-5. Certainly in Southwest Washington, we have the grooves coming back. We have a lot of maintenance to do if we're going to maintain a world-class transportation system. It's going to take funding. We have advocated for a number of years to move some of the operating budget money over to transportation. It'd be a small fraction of the operating budget money. It's not unprecedented. Most states in the country do this already to provide a foundation for the transportation system. We have suggested, of course, using the sales tax on motor vehicles to pay for roads and bridges. That seems like there's a common sense nexus there, but it really doesn't matter how we do it. We're open to any ideas, but we need to finally make a decision that we're going to support the transportation budget in earnest if we're going to get after the transportation needs we have. The last thing I'd say on this topic is, in addition to maintenance, we have a huge problem with our large projects where the bids are coming in, 40, 50, 75% over the budgeted amount. This has to do, these big projects, there's only a limited number of firms in the country that will do these projects. They can take their business other places. We need to create a regulatory environment where they feel they can come to Washington and succeed. And if we do that, I think we'll get more competitive bidding and better prices. That's going to be important to solving both the maintenance and the big projects over the next decade.
Yeah, and look, I'm very supportive of maintenance and preservation work. I think that is in a bipartisan way. There's a lot of support. I know Senator Leas, the chair of the Transportation Committee, feels very strongly about preservation and maintenance as well. I mean, the concern is that there's just the transportation budget, as Senator Braun mentioned, is under such stress from declining gas taxes and project costs going up. One of the things I'm concerned about is if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed, the transportation budget will be in even worse shape, because that'll be billions of dollars flowing out of the transportation budget because the Climate Commitment Act funds transportation so significantly. So that'll make our challenges on preservation and maintenance and everything else in the transportation budget even more difficult, and we'll likely see very significant cuts to the transportation budget if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed.
Great. All right. I'm going to take another question. This one's from YouTube. What do you each think of the AG's generative AI bills? I know there's one in the House and the Senate. So is that something you feel like either of you would support?
Go ahead, John, if you...
Yeah, I think I believe his bill is basically to put together a task force to study how we would deal with AI issues in the state of Washington. If that's the bill you're talking about, and I got that right, then I am supportive. I am cautious about the states weighing into AI too aggressively. I think that this is both certainly some risk, and everybody's talking about the risk, and I agree with that. But it's also a gigantic source of competitive advantage for our nation, from economic advantage to national security issues, and we can't afford to fall behind. I think it's important that we have a single set of standards nationwide on as we approach this issue, and we should do so carefully in the state of Washington. I believe, that's my understanding, at least right now, that's sort of the direction the AG is suggesting. And so this is one of those sadly rare times when I agree with the Attorney General.
I agree with Senator Braun, and I have not read that bill yet. There's lots of bills introduced, so I've not gotten to all of them. But I think a task force to come up with the best way to approach this is the right way to do it. I mean, the problem with government related to technology is we're just not at the cutting edge as government. And that's not a bad thing, because we don't necessarily want or need government to be at the leading edge on all these technologies. And so the danger is if we get out too far that we actually do something that is creates some negative outcome. So I think taking some time to study it, to create a task force makes a lot of sense. And, there obviously are concerns with AI. So I don't think we should sit on our hands. So this seems like a reasonable approach.
All right. And then I know that you both have talked a lot about this in the last few days regarding police pursuit laws. But just for our viewers, can you kind of talk about what each of you is seeing going on in your caucuses regarding police pursuit?
Yeah, I can start on this one. So last year, 2 years ago, we passed a bill that restricted police pursuits. Last year, we tweaked that law and rolled it back a little bit to a level that really matches what most of the urban police departments are doing. So it does allow pursuits in certain cases. And then in other cases, like for property crimes, it doesn't allow pursuits because they're dangerous. That's one thing that everybody on every side of this issue agrees, that high-speed pursuits are dangerous. And so I think it's important that we not put the lives of police officers or bystanders at risk by having too many pursuits. But the reality is that most people in the state of Washington, probably 80 or 90% of people in Washington State, live in jurisdictions that, even if we had no statewide law, would live with police pursuit laws that are similar to what the state law is, because that's what the police departments had as their policy. That's where they arrived at this balance between safety and pursuit. And so I think we're at a good place right now. I don't think there's a need legislatively to change it, but if this initiative is certified on police pursuits, the people will get to weigh in on that. Again, even if it was repealed through the initiative, it's not going to change what most police departments are doing, because they've got concerns about safety. And one last thing I'll say on police pursuits, I really appreciate the police departments that are using technology to help in place of pursuits. So there's these GPS darts, there's drones, helicopters, where you can pursue somebody without the danger of the high-speed pursuit on the road.
Yeah, this is an area where we're going to disagree. I think we are an outlier in this area. We have need probable cause for pursuit versus reasonable suspicion, which the other 49 states in our country only require reasonable suspicion. So we're by far an outlier here. And while causality is always difficult to prove, we do know that since we put this in place, we've grown to be the worst place in the country for auto theft. And while I appreciate the small changes that were made last year to deal with violent offenders, the reality is most violent offenses don't result in a high-speed chase. The chases are largely result of some type of property crime, also often reckless driving. And the thing is, unless the police officer sees these happening, they don't have probable cause, they can't pursue. We continue to see records breaking every year in both violent but in this case, nonviolent property crime. Until we get after this, I don't think we're going to solve the problem. It's as simple as that. This is a bill that just takes us back to where we were in 2021. And I will second what Senator Billig said. I think we all agree that the high-speed chases can be dangerous, and they are not always appropriate. The difference is there's a belief on the other side of the aisle that therefore we should create statutes to guide this. Whereas on our side of the aisle, we believe we should rely on good, solid training for our law enforcement officers and make sure that we have mechanisms to hold them accountable, and then trust them to make the right decision. That's the way it ought to work. And I don't get the same conclusion Senator Billig does, that most of the urban police departments have rules that are more restrictive than state rules. I don't hear that from the ones I talk to. Perhaps we run in different crowds on that topic. But either way, I think state law ought to give local departments the flexibility to adjust their policies based on what kind of occurrences they're seeing in their city or their county. They ought to have that flexibility. We ought to trust them to do the right thing, because they have in the past, and I'm confident they would in the future. Last thing I'd mention is I agree that where possible, we ought to use technology to conduct these pursuits. The simple fact is that that's expensive. And we get reminded that the Redmond Police Department is using high-tech stuff to do pursuits. And I need to keep reminding folks, that's the most affluent place in the state. Just because the most affluent place in the state can afford to do this doesn't mean every place else can, and everywhere else deserves to be, have ability to pursue or to deal with crime in their communities. The state ought to provide reasonable guidelines to give locals flexibility, provide the funding for training, and then get out of the way and trust them to do the right thing.
All right. Well, that ends the time we have for today. Thanks again for both of you for joining us, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. If we didn't get to your question, please don't think we didn't hear it. We use your questions or concerns from events like these or those emailed into our newsrooms as tips to inform our coverage. You can also support local journalism and stay up to date on Washington State coverage by subscribing to your local news sites at the Olympian, the News Tribune, the Bellingham Herald, or the Tri-City Herald. Thanks.
Thanks, Shauna. Bye.